Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us today for an amazing presentation as part of our International Education Week and bi-monthly Globe Talk series. My name is Tanya Sadowski. I am one of the program coordinators at the Community Solution Education System Global Engagement Department, and I'm very excited to welcome you today. Before we get to our presenters, I do want to go through everything that we have coming up. But first, a little bit about International Education Week. It's a time that we take each year to recognize and celebrate the benefits of international education and global exchange. A joint initiative of the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Department of Education, universities and institutions around the globe are encouraged to create and participate in events around International Education Week that promote global initiatives. That being said, here is hopefully what we have coming up. There we go. So this is what we have coming up this week. Today, you are very fortunate to be joining us for Ubuntu to Aloha, ECCE's Global Playbook for Connecting Cultures, Care, and Well-Being. Tomorrow on Wednesday, November 19th, please join us for a student panel from two of our schools, the Chicago School and the Colleges of Law, as they talk about their study abroad experience. On Thursday, we have another presentation from some of our faculty members and an NGO in India to talk about a program, Educate to Empower E-Academy, Breaking the Cycle of Poverty Through Education. And on Friday, we have two presentations for you. One will be from our Global Engagement Department team, myself and my colleagues. I'm talking about our Global Distinction Program and giving an overview and a demonstration of that program and the application. And then after that, we will have a panel of students again, a presentation by students who have been part of or are part of the Global Distinction Program, talking about their experience with that and also how does it help and make them be a global citizen and what does that mean? Okay, let's go there. I mentioned that today's presentation is part of our bi-monthly Globe Talk series. We are incorporating it this time into International Education Week. Our Globe Talk series provides virtual year-round discussions to introduce our community to thought leaders in higher education, experts on key functional areas, best practices, and the diversity of thought necessary to expand our own internal strategic thinking. So we're very, very, very excited to have been able to incorporate this series within International Education Week. A few tips before we begin. Please do mute yourself throughout the presentation. There will be time at the end for Q&A and interaction with the presenters. Do feel free to use the chat box and any reactions throughout. We do request your patience with technology. As we all know, sometimes things happen. We will do our best to make it through. If there are going to be any issues of technology-wise, all of these presentations are recorded and will be available to everybody who registers for these events via email on our YouTube link. You will be getting that later on this afternoon or evening. Without further ado, I just want to remind you that today's speech or presentation is Ubuntu to Aloha, ECCE's Global Playbook for Connecting Cultures, Care, and Well-Being. And we have two wonderful presenters today. Ms. Kerri-Lee Schneider, who's the head of the department at the Early Childhood Education Studies in our partner institution in STADIO in South Africa. And then Professor Yolanda Carlos, core professor of early childhood education at Pacific Oaks College Early Childhood Education Programs. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Ms. Kerri-Lee. We can't hear you, Kerri-Lee. You're still muted.
Oh, my apologies. There we go.
No problem.
Thank you so much for the very kind introduction and a very, very warm good evening from Johannesburg, South Africa. It is my indeed oh, yes, indeed. Thank you, Natasha. Much appreciated. A very warm welcome to each of you, and it is my indeed honor and privilege to be able to discuss and share on this important topic of critical significance to us in ECCE, but particularly so honored to do so alongside my esteemed colleague, Professor Yolanda Carlos. So let us get going. I'm going to share my screen. 1 moment. Go. Okay. So as Tanya very kindly said, the topic of this Globe Talk is Ubuntu to Aloha. And as we go through the presentation, you'll be able to see the significance around those particular discourses, the language and the significance and the meaning that they encapture. So we're really going to focus on ECCE, and that really refers to the critical foundation and the early years of life, particularly from birth to age 4, 5, or 6, depending in which context it is perceived and positioned. So today it's about the global playbook for connecting cultures, care, and well-being. And so in line with our conversation, or in line with the abstract, we're really looking into an exploration of the key philosophies or underpinnings of communalism, cultural reciprocity, and well-being across both South Africa and the Americas, and how collectively that can and does drive global best practices in ECCE, and by virtue helping to foster resilient, interdependent, and holistically healthy children, also as citizens ready and prepared for a global future. And so what does that really look like? So it's quite a full-lengthly abstract, but the idea is how does each context position childhoods and children? And how do we see the core tenets of communalism, cultural reciprocity, and well-being underline and mold what we do, how we think, and how we practice in ECCE? And by virtue, the way we think about, the way we act toward our practice, the way we see and perceive children and shape our pedagogies in alignment with that, the whole ideal, although not always realistic in the sense that it is happening, especially in a 21st century world, is to build the attributes that children need to be resilient, interdependent, and holistically well. And so it's always important to start from a grassroots level, and that's about having not necessarily an understanding that we agree upon, but at least one that is mutual, so that we can have a shared understanding of the key terminology we are using. And so the first one is communality, and that is about an interdependence. It's about relating to other. It is about coming together and understanding that as humans, we are by virtue social creatures. And so what does that mean for the realm when I am in relation to another person? It takes slightly a different view from myself as an individual to my place within a collection. It is about identifying myself as part of a group, which by virtue is intrinsically linked to and derived from the relationships and obligations I have with others. So it's quite relational. How do I relate to my fellow human being? And what are the kinds of traditions, practices, and behaviors that allow us to come together and find within a group a sense of shared belonging? The second core construct is cultural reciprocity. And we know the second value of that term, reciprocity, is about mutuality. It is about having dialogues where we exchange ideas. It is about looking at power relationships quite differently, and ones that are more equitable. It is refraining from a top-down approach and rather looking at a bottom-up. I see you, I hear you, I value you, and I am engaged in reciprocal and responsive listening. Most important, it is the mutual exchange of cultural and traditional knowledge. And as opposed to a one-sided view, the strength is in the diversity, the co-construction or the co-creation of norms that values heterogeneity rather than homogeneous society, promoting the value of shared learning, that learning by virtue is shared. It is collective. It happens through connection. And finally, from a South African context, the idea of well-being is imbued in the concept of Ubuntu. I am because you are. I am because we are. And so well-being is not just necessarily one-sided, as perhaps literature and research once was. It is not looking at the physical well-being of children only, or, for example, their creative well-being. But by virtue, it is holistic. It is looking at children through all the lenses and recognizing that the head, the heart, and the body matter equitably to the overall well-being of children. And so it is a multidimensional state of flourishing that's inextricably linked to what is now the common rhetoric of social sustainability and the key values of justice, equality, and community. If we look at each of those in a little bit more detail, and from the image, you can see the positionality of childhood and children. How are they viewed? And you'll hear the same kind of discourse from Yolanda's presentation, but it really is about communalism. It's about the connectedness in generations, the connection between intergenerations. But the heart and soul of communality is how people invested in early childhood worked together to optimize both their care and education. And so, as I previously referred, ECCE is underpinned by the African philosophy of Ubuntu. I am because you and we are. So, what does this then mean for a philosophy of education and pedagogy, the science of teaching and learning, within the sector of ECCE? It mandates a sense of collectiveness, a reciprocal responsibility for all children. Prior to 2022, the responsibility of children remained rather in the realm of two departments, the Department of Health and the Department of Social Development. And those two departments were primarily responsible for the care of children. From 2022, April to be specific, we saw a great shift in the periphery, the sidelining of ECCE to the centerfold of society, where it is now part of the responsibility of the Department of Basic Education. So you have the tripod, education, health, and social welfare that collectively are duly responsible for every child's overall well-being, both in care, in education, and in their citizenship as being within a democratic South Africa. Thus, it emphasizes a coordinated, integrated approach between those three departments. Interestingly, we see the family, and if you look through the lens, for example, of Bronfenbrenner, a systematic approach, the child in some ways is at the centerfold of society, but we recognize their primary, their instinctive caregivers as a child-first teacher. The school is the second, and the environment as a third. In a South African context, 60% of our centers are situated in township and rural areas that are not always necessarily as well catered to as those in the urban areas. They are on different quintiles, which means they have different access to civic and kind of environmental facilities and infrastructure and structures. But what's really important is to recognize that as much as family is part of these contexts, On the other side of the same coin, there is a lack of access to essential infrastructure and safe security for our children that is very often hindered on socioeconomic status. The second value, cultural reciprocity, in a post-apartheid South Africa from 1994 onwards, ECCE has become a melting pot of cultures, a heterogeneous society inclusive of a variety of cultures, tribes, traditions, and languages. So much so that South Africa has 12 official languages, with sign language having recently been included. We know language is wholly imbued in ways of culture, in ways of practice, and most importantly, in the way in which ourselves and children from birth onwards start to identify themselves. What then does this mean in the sector of ECCE? It calls on for us to shift away from a dominant way of knowing, to recognize that there are different funds of knowledge and integration of skills and life experiences that comes from this rich diversity where children are or have different home languages, different first additional languages, different ways of being, different ways of perceiving the world, different ways of encountering conflict and dealing with that, different ways of building relationships. For example, in the African culture, to look someone in the eye, an elderly person, is deemed disrespectful because of the age difference. However, from a Caucasian perspective, by not looking at somebody in the eye, it seemed to be disrespectful. So how do you kind of deal with those differences in a space where inclusion is needing to become the norm? Multilingualism and multiculturalism is recognition of the multiple indigenous languages that informs our South African landscape. And so if our pedagogy, if our teaching and learning is to mirror this so that children find resonance in their education, we have to consider what is a more responsive and caring relational pedagogy. The truth is that it lies in the indigenous value systems and practices that are character building for our children, part of their temperament, part of their lifelong dispositions, not only in early years education, but for life formation. This is where it's probably the most difficult, is that it demands a shift in thinking. It demands a disruption in what we know. It's a contestation of a set of beliefs we often take for truth. And that is to challenge what we consider universal best practice. And instead of simply agreeing or taking the status quo, it is to create spaces to import existing Euro-Western modules into programs. So not to, for the common saying or the common rhetoric, to throw out the baby in the bath water. So it is to keep universal practice, but within that, to carve spaces that don't forgo the identity of children and the value that they bring with generational indigenous ways of being in the world. And so we have to ask ourselves some really tough questions. Is curriculum and are our programs cognizant of and responsive to local needs and cultural values so that our children can still be citizens of a local context, but also be globally astute, globally participatory? For example, children's learning is being characterized as active and social. And so in South Africa, we have an interesting juncture. Our policy positions children as partners in their learning journey. And it is to see that learning is an active social construction of knowledge and experience. But in practice, although it is espoused, what is enacted is sometimes not necessarily ideal. We still see the power shifts where children have less voices in their own learning journey. And so we have to be more intentional in our discourse, the language that we use. Is our language inclusive of all? or without intention, is it exclusionary to some? And so our practitioners, the teachers that we refer to in South Africa, require specialized training to gain pedagogical insights to address this as part of cultural diversity. Finally, in terms of well-being, as I said previously, it's about the holistic being of child and all of the areas that deem to make them whole: the heart, the hand, the spirit, the body. It's inclusive of all the child's domains from birth to age 5. It is recognizing and safeguarding the first 1,000 days of life as a critical window of opportunity where the prerequisite knowledge, skills, and values for being and belonging in the world are already laid. It's being responsive to children's health and nutritional care and ensuring that, in line with the National Development Goals of 2030, every child, irrespective of socio-economic status, irrespective of upbringing, ethnicity, and race, which used to divide us and segregate us, now provide full access not only to early childhood education, but quality early childhood education. Although research shows that, especially post and slightly pre-COVID, our children face terrible statistics of gender-based violence that was exacerbated during the COVID pandemic. And although in a South African environment and context, children have their own Bill of Rights, we often see that these are foregone because of the lack of safety and protection. And so how do we bring those core cornerstones back into our educational offerings, where every child can walk, if they have to school safely, and that schools themselves become safe havens of joy, of learning, and of opportunity? We are focusing more on the provision of socio-emotional learning because latest research shows that because of the pandemic, children have not laid the fundamental skills about how to create friendships, about how to build grit, how to build resilience, how to build empathy. Almost that idea is, I understand you. I can wear the shoes on your feet, so to speak. It's to have a true transcendence about what must it be like living in your context so that I become more fully enriched with a better understanding of who you are and how you are positioned. ECCE has become, therefore, a driver for addressing the legacy of apartheid and the subsequent inequalities surrounding race, gender, religion, etc. It is about mitigating childhood adversity to allow for positive transformation. What does this mean for the workplace? It's to safeguard the children's well-being as well as the teachers' well-being. How can we begin to do this? Very often in contexts that are restrained by resources, by time, low wages, and especially for teachers, limited benefits as it relates to ECCE. And so we have learned that the richness and our assets is depending on one another, the collaboration between multiple stakeholders. And finally, what are the ways forward? It starts at the grassroots level, finding authentic and measurable ways to advance ECCE global best practices by leveraging not the deficits, not what we don't have, but that which we do, which lies in communality, cultural reciprocity, and well-being. In other words, ideas might be to implement home-to-hub responsive care programs that includes the family and all that they have to offer, and see them as a resource rather than a constraint to the well-being of the educators themselves and, most importantly, the children in their care. It is to consider creating a contextualized play-based curriculum, integrating and celebrating and safeguarding the indigenous knowledge, the local languages, and the cultural narratives, the stories of each of our children, so that we are truly inclusive, where every child, irrespective of difference, finds a sense of belonging. It is to rest on neuroscience and to help children learn to co and self-regulate by equipping educators to transform what is often a South African reality of toxic stress into the power of resilience, grit, and determination. Finally, it is to invest in all of our well-being, to implement a sustained program of professional and psychosocial support for ECC practitioners. I thank you. Over to you, Yolanda.
Thank you, Kerri-Lee. You left us with some great and amazing thoughts. I just want to share that Kerri-Lee and I both work separate. But then when we meet to discuss what we're going to present, it's amazing how it's going to sound very similar in some ways, but it will have some distinct differences. So I'm going to start sharing my presentation for us today. Okay. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for attending our Globe Talk. It is exciting to have you all here with us today. So first off, I think I may have, yes, okay, here we go. Sorry about that. Ubuntu to Aloha, ECE's Global Playbook for Connecting Cultures, Care, and Well-Being. First off, play. That is the universal bridge across all early learning and education, across our philosophies and our pedagogy. It's play. And one of the things that when we are working in good quality programs, we want to value and honor cultures through the culture of play. But not only that, to build pro-social and emotional skills in children. So that is also known as social emotional development. And versus individualistic, but more cooperative play. And throughout today, when I talk about cooperative play, I'm also going to be talking about cooperative intelligence. So collective intelligence versus individualistic intelligence. So when we look at play and we think about play, developmentally appropriate practices is very important in honoring cultural appropriateness and creating learning environments that take into account individual ages, the cultures that children come from, their views, and the way they interact with the world. And lastly, creating an environment that strives to meet the needs of children, developing safe learning environments so that it allows children to take the risks that are necessary for learning and building that learning to the next level. Ubuntu. So we heard already the culture of care and connection, diversity, and what that looks like in South Africa. But when we're looking at it globally, and we're looking at it through the lens of early childhood education and care, what I would like to expound on is when we're looking at quality care and education programs, it's understanding the connection between social emotional development and developing respect and reciprocity for all cultures. And that begins with the professional and our professional pedagogies and our practices. So it's helping through the culture of care, and what I like to call care ethics. So it's connecting the social and emotional development with respect and reciprocity for all cultures. This helps to build healthier lives and healthier futures. Another thing that good preschools promote are pro-social skills that through the lens of commonalities, looking at what we have that connects us together, respecting each other's traditions, our heritages that strengthen the cultural identities in the children that we serve. As we strengthen their cultural identities through shared journeys, through global connections, through storytelling, it gives them a sense of belonging not just at school or within their families, but globally. We also help work with families and communities to help them understand that in today's modernity, the systems as we have known them are ceasing to exist. The profession of early childhood education can assist families to form new ways of facing humanity's wrongs through anti-bias education. Anti-bias education was developed and created at Pacific Oaks College, and it helps children, families, and communities to understand fairness and to build empathy. And looking at the world through the lens of reciprocity and respect. Lastly, our shared journeys. Sharing our culture, developing healthy, belonging humans, we do it through storytelling and passing down of cultural memories, traditions, and customs, and care ethics of caring for others. Collective togetherness. At Pacific Oaks College, again, you heard me already talk about the anti-bias curriculum. We also, within the anti-bias curriculum, understanding that building respect, fairness, and caring for others helps us to create a unity and to peace build. Our philosophy is also one of learning how to work through conflict and understanding that violence in today's world, as Kerri-Lee already spoke of, is something that our children face. In many countries, 1 out of 3 children live in violence. Helping us help to work with children to understand compassion and to seek peace will help our children to learn how to stay safe, helping them with the abilities to negotiate, to work through conflict, using pro-social skills, and promoting tolerance and justice and fairness for all will help to build that peace building that we want to see in the world. Again, I discussed Pacific Oaks College Heart, Head, and Hands, and Kerri-Lee shared something very similar to this. So at Pacific Oaks College, we believe that our philosophy is what is in our heart, and what is in our heart comes through our thoughts, and our thoughts come out in our practices. So that's our head, heart, hands model at Pacific Oaks College. It's helping us to pass down our peace building, our respect for others, our sense of fairness and reciprocity to educators, to children, families, and communities. So it takes a village to raise a child. And quality preschool's environment provides safe, caring learning environments. And taking into account the statistic I gave that many children in countries, 1 out of every 3 are facing violence within their home, their community, or the world around them. So how do we work with that as quality preschool teachers and within our practices? We teach children how to respond to violence and conflict. We teach them how to negotiate and for us to build and strengthen their executive brain function. For example, learning to take turns, waiting patiently, negotiating the use of materials, not always making sure that there's enough materials for all, but if there isn't, allowing them the time to negotiate how to share the use of the materials and the tools that they have so that they're taking away these lifelong skills of negotiating and caring for materials, helping them to learn how to care for the environment, building those pro-social skills through social emotional development, learning, and then learning that there is a variety of ways of seeing things and doing things so that we are not just pigeonholing one way of thinking and one way of doing, but helping them to understand that the world is changing, modernity is changing, and with that, we have to change as well. We have to help them to learn how to make good choices, to use the good choices versus resolving conflict through violence to solve problems. Good preschools teach conflict resolutions. We've heard about 3 things. I'm going to expound on a little bit more. So we heard about play, we heard about relationships, and the collective togetherness or intelligence. Good preschools really expound on the collective togetherness or intelligence, knitting together the community to help children understand we're more powerful together than we are as individuals or individualistically. So teaching conflict resolution is very important. Promoting a set of universal values and attitudes and behaviors that reject violence, that promote peaceful conflict resolutions through dialogue, through negotiation. For example, even at the early stages, children understand the meaning of fairness, and not only fairness, but advocating for those they feel that are not being treated fairly. So a question that I want to leave you with, because we have a Mentimeter and we have some participation that we would like to ask you to participate in. So I am going to cut it a little bit short. I want to ask you, as you walk away today, to take like much a coin in your hand that you would turn over, or a stone, and you would feel the smoothness or the nubs in it, and ask yourself, what is peace for me? What is peace for me? And that peace, as we learn that peace, learn to then provide that peace within the learning environments that we create, with the interactions with others, and with what we give children through helping them understand their cultures, their families, and their traditions, through helping them develop storytelling so that they can internalize their own culture, feel proud about it, and then pass those down. I would like for you to, if you can, please scan this. It's going to take you to Mentimeter. And let me pull that up. As they said, technology works until it doesn't, right? I'm going to okay, wait, maybe I can do it this way. I tried this earlier and it worked, but sometimes things don't always work. All right, I'm going to stop the slideshow. Here we go. My apologies. I'm going to stop. Kerri-Lee, can you see my screen?
I can still see the Mentimeter slide, Yolanda.
Okay, good. So I'm going to try and pull up what we have for us. Keeps wanting to take me into the one that I'm going to be doing later today. I don't want that one. I think that's a problem with doing multi.
Yolanda, do you think we could go to the one we were going to do later, just given perhaps the time? What do you reckon?
I'm gonna still try to pull it. My apologies. So if you want to talk a little bit, that would be great.
Sure. It's asking for a code to join.
Yeah. Oh,
So
it
maybe,
is.
yes, if you do have the code that we could just share with the audience, they could join that way.
Let me get in there.
So in the meantime, just while we sort out the Mentimeter, leaving off from what Yolanda shared, it's about almost being intentionally reflective and thinking about the feeling of that rock. And it always has two sides or more to it. And so if you think about that almost as an analogy in working with children and in ECCE, what could be the permutations surrounding that? When children, and I think Sally wrote in the chat, when you open up your classrooms and you have a new group of children entering that space for the first time, what, as an educator, do you want it to kind of provide? What's the initial message that you want all children to receive? And when children enter that space of learning, how do you want them to construct a sense of self, a sense of communalism with others that are sharing that space with them? And so, how do you think about your own, what signifies as peace, and bringing it into that context where that space is by virtue shared by others of different ethnicities, races, orientations, genders, etc. And how do you use that space as constructively as possible to build children for local resonance but global citizenship? And so if you could take perhaps a minute or two just to think about what does that look like pragmatically in today's world for ECCE, we would really like to hear your voices and your perspectives on what that means to you. Yolanda, did you perhaps want to try the cloud first?
Yeah, I'm going to actually try and build it again because it's not coming up for me.
In the meantime, if you want to write your responses in the chat, please feel free and we can take it from there.
Okay, so here we are. We'll do one here. My apologies. I'm just going to do what I have here because for whatever reason, it is only letting me have the latest one that I did and not the one that I needed. Okay, so I'm going to start sharing here. This should help us. It has a code up here. So what I'll do is I'll write down the code and then I'll put it in the chat. Okay. Okay, and then I'm going to put in the chat the code. There it is. So I would like to just talk a little bit more about modernity. Our world is changing really quickly right now, and the systems as we know it are rapidly changing. We have to adapt to those changes and to be able to develop new skills in working with the world around us so that we can give those skills to children to help them to be able to problem solve, not just for themselves, but to take those new ideas and those new thoughts to their families so that their families also are able to understand that if my child can change and they're ready and adaptable to those changes, then perhaps I too can begin to do that. The world as we know it will continue to change. A lot of it has to do with technology, and that's global. And I would say our job as practitioners is to help keep the humanity in the use of the technologies, in the use of artificial intelligence, and to help them to understand that we as humans have the creativity, we have the wisdom, and that we are not going to be giving that up to technology or to artificial intelligence. Our creativity is what makes us the part of us, our humanity, the greatness of humans. And we cannot allow that to be changed. Doesn't mean that we're not going to be using technology or artificial intelligence. It means that we need to use how to manage it and stay human throughout it all. As we learn to do that, then we will be able to give that to our children, to our families, and to our communities. Because if we do not understand this key piece of modernity, we're going to lose the sense of our humanity in that technology. So I think that is the biggest thing that I want to expound upon in bridging the global communities together, is understanding that we have that ability to give to children, to families, and to our communities the understanding of the importance of our humanity all throughout whatever it is we're doing, but especially with technology, especially with peace building, especially with learning how to build relationships and friendships, especially lifelong friendships. And Kerri-Lee, please. She always has some amazing things to say.
You too kind. And then thank you, Yolanda, for a very powerful contribution and for making us look at ourselves more deeply in terms of what is our humanness and how do we bring that into the centerfold of spaces we share with young children. And so quality ECCE is really an interconnected cycle of communal responsibility. Our strength is in networking and our cultural reciprocity that is not only developmentally appropriate, but culturally responsive at the same time, so that together we can create a foundation for all children, for their well-being to flourish. And so to collate what we have spoken about this evening and this morning, it is about creating spaces for storytelling, for hearing our children's truths, whatever that might be, and to recognize that each has a story to tell that is of significance, of their life experience, of themselves, of their past, their present, and the future. It is to develop a diverse way of thinking so that neurodivergence becomes more normative in what we do. It is challenging linear methodologies and looking for the kind of difference among what we know to be similar, and not using difference in restriction, but using difference as our power for connection. It is recognizing that we hold on to multiple intelligences and that breaking boundaries is becoming more fluid. The world is not as decisive or as kind of structured as it once was. It is becoming far more fluid. And though, for example, as Yolanda referred to, the advent of AI and where the world is going is not to lose our places within it and to allow children to recognize that with all the novelty in the world, they are the most novel and their ways of seeing the world should be centerfold in thinking about how we develop programs, curriculums, environments that speak to children, so that we don't have school systems where our children are only expected to fit in, but schools are really responsive to children. They are flexible. They are dynamic spaces that are ever changing, not only ever changing in alignment with a world of difference, but the more we learn about children as spaces that safeguard and celebrate what they bring to the table. And finally, it's ethics of reciprocity. And so when we look at the term ECCE, it's about early childhood care and education, not one or the other, but both and. And so as early childhood educators, it's to recognize that we play an essential part within the education system. And that even though people may not necessarily always recognize our status compared perhaps to other sectors of the schooling band, it is to recognize that we have a true privilege of both caring for and educating children simultaneously. Thank you, Yolanda.
Thank you for that. I'd like to open it up to question and answers. Anyone have anything that you want to add, ask? Please, this is the time to do it. We have about 5 more minutes.
Hi everybody. I'm Quinn from Pacific Oaks Children's School. This is so amazing. It's so beautiful, and it's so appropriate to what I'm doing research on I'm in the doctoral program at Pacific Oaks College, and empathy, and I even go into kind of the global construct of empathy in preschoolers. And it's just exactly what I've been spending hundreds of hours on researching. So it's so nice and reaffirming, and I feel very like, oh, I'm doing the right research. Thank you for validating that. And thank you for everything you've offered. It's very inspiring. I have lots of scribbled notes here. I'm like, oh, I'll have to kind of change my lit review and incorporate this.
I'm glad that you were able to connect with what we're saying. I think that the biggest thing that I want to expound on is how quickly modernity is changing, and that those changes are not always kind to us as humans. Therefore, that building of empathy, of reciprocity, of helping children understand the biggest part of our humanity is relationships, is caring. I think that's so wonderful. I want to read your research. And I invite you, when you're done, to have it published. I am a peer reviewer on an international journal. I would be happy to give you the information to submit, and we'll see what happens, right? Yes, yes. It's exciting.
Yolanda beat me to it. I was going to say I would love to read your work, and in a world that's often really hard, and a world that's often really tough, and you see an insurgence in childhood suicide and childhood bullying, its kindness has to be the universal language. And so I applaud you on investigating something like empathy, because it is at the crux of the human condition. And I think sometimes in schooling, it's the push down effect. It's how quickly can children learn the 1, 2, 3s and the ABCs, and no one's arguing that that's knowledge that's not important, but is it imperative? And I think, in a lot of it, we lose the human condition. And so imagine walking into your classroom as a child where empathy is the shared value. That would be absolutely remarkable. When I'm having a bad day, somebody perhaps can recognize and identify that which I'm feeling and provide me with words of comfort, a reassuring hand, a space in the sandpit what that does to my sense of self is so invaluable that will make the learning of all the content that much more responsive and easier. So I too, I don't quite sit on the committee that Yolanda does, but I would be honored to read your work, and thank you for choosing to contribute your PhD scholarship to the field of early childhood care and education. We know that knowledge which is shared and knowledge which informs our practice can only be to the benefit of us all.
Absolutely. And last but not least, we have to remember that children are our future. And therefore, that makes us, those who are working with young children in education, very powerful in helping to shape lives, care ethics, empathy, and all of the humanity pieces that we need to build a better world. And I commend you, Quinn. I commend you for your research, and I can't wait. Maybe we can have you even do a globe talk and share out your findings. That would be amazing.
That would be good practice for when I
Yes.
do the proposal and defense.
Reach out to me. Reach out to me. Okay. I think this concludes our talk. I'm going to stop share. I thank you all for attending today and for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us, for being patient, because technology isn't always our best friend. I had a couple of Mentimeters that we were going to be doing, but I also have another one because when I leave here, I'll be doing another presentation and it would only let me have that one. So that's note for future. Thank you. And I'll give it back to Tanja.
Thank you so much. Thank you both again so much. Really, truly inspirational and just really, really wonderful presentation day. Really, thank you very much. Quinn, hit me up for a Globe Talk too if you want to. We can work on that. Thank you all again for joining us today. As I mentioned at the beginning, you will all be receiving the link to the recording of this. And I would also invite our presenters, if you want to share your presentation, I can send that as an attachment to that email as well. Please join us for the rest of International Education Week. The next 3 days, we do have wonderful events coming. But for now, thank you all very much. Thank you again, Yolanda and Kerri-Lee. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you for making it a great presentation.
Thank
Goodbye,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.